what we had run into, and just a bit of background, a little 5-year-old guy I was working with was standing outside his home with his mom. His mom was talking to his case manager, and for whatever reason, the case manager said, "How's the elopement going?" And she's like, "Well, it's been, I haven't had him out much." And the case manager said, "Well, what if you and she's like, "What do you do now?" And she's like, "Well, I'm holding his hand." And she's like, "Well, would he run away if you let go of his hand?" And she's like, "I don't know." And the case manager said, "Well, why don't you try it?" Well, he did, and he made it about 6 blocks because he's a really athletic 5-year-old. Made it into middle of a busy street, and fortunately a driver pulled over, grabbed him, waited for mom to catch up, and brought them both back home. And this is a little guy who'd been hit by a car before he began services with us in an elopement situation. So we really thought a functional analysis was necessary for him. We have an Operant Learning Center, kind of a long building, classrooms off of the main hallway, and an attached playground with doors everywhere. And if you're going to do a functional analysis of elopement, that's probably a pretty good place to do it in. But then one of the concerns was it was a pretty busy place during the day, and I talked to the staff and I said, "Do you have time, like on a Friday night or weekend, to do an FA?" And they're like, "Absolutely." And I was like, "Oh, super." And then I was also, though, concerned about all these doors, and I didn't want him running into a street, and I thought we needed more help, and talked to a few people, and Gina was one of them who volunteered. And then Pierre said, could we have some other people observe? And before you know it, we had 10 or 15 people watching a functional analysis. And again, going back to my training at Seashore House with Tim and folks like Joe Lally and Bud Mace, one of the things we learned was everything should be tightly controlled. All right, we're behind these observation windows and everything else. And I'm also reminded of a paper Mike Davison wrote. He's an experimental person. One of the things he criticized the applied field about, he said our beakers were too sterile. All right, our treatment sessions and our assessment sessions were probably too sterile and didn't really replicate kind of natural environment. So anyway, we were able to bring this little guy here to the Operant Learning Center, and my biggest fear, and again going back to Tim's talk, was that there'd be 10 or 15 of us who were there and he'd do nothing. All right, so we'd spend a Friday night doing nothing. And I'd say probably in our third condition, we ran the standard conditions. We also ran a transition condition, kind of coming in from the playground. It was the classic where you're restricting something good and telling them, not only do you have to come in from the playground, but you have to do some work. So we ran that condition as well. And I just have to demonstrate at one point. One of the conditions, the tangible condition, we had restricted a bubble machine in a different classroom and brought him back into the session room. And here's kind of what he did. He kind of got up from his chair, and he kind of looks around. There's like 10 or 15 of us. I'm like, there's no way he's going to run, all right? He's kind of like that. Another step. Nobody's doing anything. He's like, well, I'm out of here, all right? And so unlike, again, the case that Tim presented, we didn't have a problem with elopement. He was like, there's a bubble machine, I'm out of here. The other thing that I wanted to mention, again, when my training, general rule we had was 10-minute sessions per day. That's what you had to get in. And I made the decision, ran 5-minute sessions, again, kind of a standard functional analysis. We were pressed to get in 6 5-minute sessions in about 3 hours. And part of that was neither of the therapists who worked with this child had ever run an FA. And so, we got there and I prepped them before, but as soon as we got in the building, everything became real. Then it was like, what do I do if this happens? What do I do if this happens? So we did a little coaching there. The other thing I wanted to point out too, again, some folks, and Gina might have been one of them at one point, it's like, can you guard a door at the far end of the building? And you might not get any action down there for half an hour, but really appreciate you coming. And then we would kind of rotate through. But what I soon found there was that this began as really kind of a purely clinical or FA for this child. It also became a really useful teaching opportunity. The questions I got from these BCBAs, again 10 or 15 showed up multiple times over Friday night and again weekends. They were great questions, and some of them, and none of them were like, well, I think you screwed up, you know, and let me tell you why I think you screwed up.
That was after you left.
Yeah, that was post, yeah. But, you know, so they're really good questions like, you know, why do you pick 5 minutes, you know, and why didn't you run this other condition? And, you know, what if you do this? And I'd say, that's a great question. And in fact, at one point, I finally said to a couple of them, I said, look, it's been like 20 minutes between sessions, and he'd been playing or whatever, but I said, we really got to get going. So we've used that now multiple times, and you know, the thing that I thought was really unique, again, about the people I work with here is how eager they were to learn, all right, and how open they were about, I haven't done this, I've had a class in it, I've got a BCBA, I've never done this, I want to see it. And to me, that's exquisite, all right? That's what we should be all about.